A silent, efficient killer is ravaging California's scenic coastline. Discovered in Marin County in 1995, it strikes without warning, and now has been found as far south as Big Sur in Monterey County, and as far north as northern Sonoma County. Eventually, scientists fear that it could imperil up to 1,500 miles of California and Oregon coast. The killer is a new pathogen that attacks at least 3 species of oak trees: coast live oak, black oak, and Shreve's oak, and a species that is closely related to oaks called tan oak. These trees generally thrive in California's coastal foothills, as well as many other locations throughout the state. Because of their widespread ecological, aesthetic, and often economic contributions to the environment, the large-scale and expanding range of dying oak trees is becoming a major concern among homeowners, land managers, and public agencies. Oaks are aesthetically pleasing in the landscape, where they contribute to soil stability and water quality. They are treasured by homeowners and add to property values. Oak woodlands are also highly valued by recreationalists. And they provide food and shelter for numerous wildlife species. In fact, they provide habitat for more than half of our terrestrial vertebrates. The large number of dead oaks and tan oaks in coastal areas is also creating large amounts of fuel for wildfire, a perennial California nemesis. University of California horticulturist Pavel Svihra was the first to notice the dead and dying oaks. He gave the problem its name, sudden oak death, or SOD.
Well, I gave name to this disease, sudden oak death, mainly because when you see first symptoms, the actual progression of the foliar manifestation is very rapid. The tree will have rather light green or slightly browning foliage, but very soon, within 6 to 8 weeks, the foliage changes to brown. So because the sudden change in foliage, I call it sudden oak death.
Since Svihra's discovery of sudden oak death, UC researchers have been scrambling to find the cause of the problem. Initially, insects, disease, pollution, and other environmental disturbances were all suspect. The first breakthrough came when researcher David Rizzo found a new disease organism in the tissue of the dead and dying trees. Although related to some 60 other types of pathogens from the genus Phytophthora that cause a variety of problems with agricultural crops, this particular strain had never been seen before in the United States. Another form of Phytophthora was responsible for the Irish potato blight in the 1840s. And while this pathogen is technically classified as a type of water mold, it is frequently referred to by researchers as a fungus due to its fungus-like properties.
What we see here are the earliest symptoms of the disease on a coast live oak, this bleeding that comes directly out of the bark, where the pathogen has entered through the bark and is killing the tissue directly inside the tree. And the bleeding is sort of the host's way of trying to kick the fungus back out. But in this case, it doesn't do a particularly good job of it. So here you have a tree at the really advanced stages of infection. We can see the typical bleeding symptom of infection by Phytophthora. But at these later stages, as more and more of the bark is killed by the fungus, we see evidence of various types of bark beetles and ambrosia beetles that will move in and burrow into the bark, burrow into the wood. And you can see examples of boring dust that are left by the beetles as they enter into the tree. Usually the beetles will attack the spots that are bleeding, so the areas that have been killed by the pathogen. Potentially they can expand out and hit other areas of the tree, but mostly they are hitting the areas that are already infected by Phytophthora. The role of the beetles in accelerating the death of the tree is not really known at this time, but they may play a role. This is a fungus, hypoxylon, which, like the bark beetles, often will come in at later stages of infection. This fungus will decay the wood just beneath the bark and may accelerate the changing of the foliage of trees from green to brown. It may also lead to structural damage in the tree that may allow for snapping of trees. But again, this is what we consider an opportunistic or secondary organism that is coming in following infection by Phytophthora. And in addition to the bark beetles and the hypoxylon, there are multiple other fungi and insects that may follow infection that could potentially accelerate death of the tree or are just simply found on the tree. You can see an example of a tree that died last year that still has many of the brown leaves still attached to the branches. And that's one of the symptoms of this disease, is that the tree may be infected for a year or more, but the foliar symptoms often occur over a relatively short period of time, where the tree turns from green to brown in a matter of weeks, such that the tree appears to have died suddenly, hence the name sudden oak death. This is quite common, and if you look on the hillsides around us here, you'll see numerous trees that died. Eventually those leaves fall off and you'll just see the gray skeleton of a dead tree.
A second breakthrough in the mystery of sudden oak death was serendipitous. It happened when a British researcher found that a new Phytophthora, discovered in European rhododendrons in 1993, looked just like the organism he remembered seeing during a visit to UC Berkeley in the summer of 2000. Researchers believe that the Phytophthora on European rhododendrons is indeed the same Phytophthora strain that is killing California's oak trees, and are in the process of confirming this. In January 2001, this pathogen was found on a U.S. rhododendron plant for the first time in Santa Cruz County.
We have evidence that the same fungus is also found in the Netherlands and Germany on rhododendrons, and that the fungus was first noticed in these countries around 1993. We have now compared some of the molecular evidence and the morphology, what the fungus actually looks like. They're identical. The host range seems to be the same. We are now collaborating with colleagues in Europe to compare side by side the fungus from California and the fungus from Europe to definitively say they are the same thing. But at this stage of the game, the evidence suggests that they are the same thing.
What the scientists still don't know is whether this new species of Phytophthora originated in California or in Europe. To date, it has not been found in any European oak trees.
We have no idea where this disease started first, or where the pathogen came from. It could be that it originated in one of these two areas, or it could be that it originated in a third area, and then it moved to both Europe and California. Certainly rhododendrons are very widely traded across the world, and there's a constant demand for new varieties of rhododendron with new characteristics, so it's really one of the easiest vectors to one of the most convenient vectors for the pathogen to move around.
Although scientific sleuthing is providing us with clues about the cause of sudden oak death, information about why it struck when it did, how far it will spread, and how it can be controlled remains elusive. This new species of Phytophthora has just recently been found to attack bay laurel and madrone trees, and now affects huckleberry plants as well.
The first very significant discovery was that this disease attacks rhododendrons. Well, later findings, which are now appearing quite exciting, mainly in madrone and in California bay laurel, is much more significant because in this case we are talking about ecotype of the forest. The composition of our forest is from these three plants here. Mainly I am referring to the coastal forest. So these trees, other hosts, have significance that they can be kind of carrier of fungal spores, and these fungal spores on foliage develop much more rapidly than in oaks, and can actually accelerate infection on oaks by jumping from foliage of these trees into the oaks.
Researcher Maggie Kelly has launched a monitoring program that she hopes will lead to ways to manage the spread of sudden oak death until research finds a way to prevent the disease altogether.
To date, the hardest hit areas are Sonoma County and the north of Sonoma County. Kings Ridge and Cazadero is very, very hard hit. Marin County, of course, which is where a lot of this effort began, has been very hard hit in several areas. China Camp State Park is one of these hot spots. And in the south, Pfeiffer Big Sur State Park is another hot spot, and it's also the southernmost extent of sudden oak death in California. The field plot protocol is really varied. We have plots set up in China Camp State Park and Marin, as well as the Marin Municipal Water District, that monitor the symptom progression of the trees. So those are trees tagged, and every 3 months researchers go out and monitor the symptom progression. So at time 1, the tree might just have bleeding. At time 2, it might have bleeding and hypoxylon. At time 3, the leaves might have changed color. So that's symptom progression. But we also have plots to determine the overall percentage of dead trees in an area. And then that's the research in the monitoring, but we also have set up a protocol for confirming whether or not trees have sudden oak death. And so that's been, up to this point, largely done out of Dave Rizzo's lab at UC Davis. But now the California Department of Food and Agriculture is joining in the effort, and so samples can be taken from trees and determined whether or not the new Phytophthora is present in CDFA labs. So that's speeding up the confirmation process quite a bit. Well, vegetation stress, and particularly moisture stress, which we think is associated with this disease, shows up really nicely in terms of a change in reflectance of near-infrared light. Not visible light, because a lot of trees will look healthy green, but in fact their leaf structure will have changed because of the loss of moisture. And so the near-infrared reflectance changes dramatically. And so we fly imagery that captures reflected near-infrared light, and so we can tell when the tree has this moisture stress. So that's what we're looking at, is the stressed trees that don't actually have a change in color yet.
Researchers are still trying to determine exactly how this disease is spread from one tree to another. They do know that Phytophthora produces zoospores, which can swim through water.
We don't have definitive answers on how the pathogen is moved from one tree to another, but we have some new evidence suggesting that it's probably moved in rain splash, that propagules of the fungus are formed on a tree, and as rain hits the tree, the propagules are in the droplets that then splash to other trees. We also have evidence that the fungus can be found in the soil. Therefore, it may be moved within a stand by people, by animals. So those are two areas where we're working now that we have preliminary evidence, but the definitive evidence is we're still working on that. The way the fungus appears to infect the tree, the larger trees, is to move through the bark, and it kills what's known as the phloem, which is how the tree transports its food, and an area known as the cambium. And the cambium is the area between the bark and the wood, and that each spring will divide and make new phloem and new xylem, which is the water conducting tissue. This fungus kills the cambium and the phloem. It does grow into the wood, but just a little bit, so it's not stopping how the tree transports water, but it does stop how the tree transports food from the leaves to the roots and vice versa. So basically the tree eventually is girdled, where the entire circumference of the stem is killed by the pathogen. Insects may also come in and stop the conduction of water by attacking the wood.
In terms of management of the disease of sudden oak death, the first issue right now that most people have in mind is identification. So first of all, we need to know where the disease is. And so that's what we're doing here is we're basically developing molecular techniques, molecular diagnostic techniques to ID the fungus quite reliably. And so that's the first step for control. The second step is not to spread the disease in areas that are unaffected. So what David Rizzo and myself are doing a lot are checking different types of vectors or media for the disease, like different plant host material, water, soil, and so forth, so that we know what things should be restricted, what activities, what trade should be restricted from areas with the disease towards, to areas that don't have the disease. And then the third thing is reduction of inoculum. So there's a lot of, disease inoculum, and we think that maybe sanitation is an important aspect of, of disease management, even if I'm not really sure what's going to accomplish. There's so many trees that are dead, and we need to make sure that when the wood is moved around, we're not spreading the disease as well. And then finally, you have proactive management treatment, for instance, like chemical treatments. And these are normally not used in the forest setting. I mean, there is no record, really, just almost no record of use of chemical treatments in the forest setting for fungal diseases. But because the problem is so prevalent also in private properties and, at the edge between the wildland setting and the urban setting, we are investigating the potential for chemical control. And we just had some good preliminary results that indicate that in some situations it may be possible to control the disease.
Officials in Marin County, where the disease was first seen, are so concerned about the massive die-off of their oaks and tan oaks that they have hired additional staff members to develop educational programs for local residents.
To address the problem, we're trying to make sure that we're reaching people in as many outlets as we can. So we've created a slideshow presentation that we're giving to homeowners groups and to arborists and interested parties. We've created written guides that we distribute throughout the county and actually to our neighboring counties as well. And we have a website online so people can get the most up-to-date information. Now that the researchers have identified it in soil and rainwater, we're trying to focus our educational efforts on those modes of spread. So what we've done is we've posted trailhead posters in areas like Marin Municipal Water District and other open space areas, and we're asking visitors to the area, when they visit infested areas, to make sure that they wash off any soil or mud off their car's tires, their mountain bike tires, pets' paws, and also that they don't remove any plant material. So that includes acorns, firewood, leaves, any kind of material that might be infected. Right now we don't have any kind of a pesticide treatment that we can recommend to homeowners for their trees. There's a number of research trials underway, but we would really caution homeowners against using anything until we have those results back.
Perhaps the most immediate threat from the dead and dying trees in such heavily populated areas as Marin County is wildfire.
Well, the Marin County Fire Department is very concerned about sudden oak death and its immediate and long-term impacts on the people of Marin County. We, on an operational basis, on an almost daily basis, we're involved with removing down trees that are in roadways that have fallen because of sudden oak death. We have, during the summer months when conditions are very dry, we have increased the staffing. We've added 2 engines. And we're also in the process of updating our fuels map of the county. The fuels map is a description of the spatial location of the different kinds of fuels that we have, the trees, the shrubs, the grasslands. And with sudden oak death, we're going to be seeing a change in those fuel complexes from an oak forest, for example, to a grassland or a shrubland. Well, the major problem with having the standing dead trees around is they've changed the forest from something that was mostly fire resistant, where we had fires that stayed on the ground as ground fires. Now we have the potential for the fires to leap up into the crowns of the trees and be carried by this dry foliage across the landscape in a fire that's less manageable than, say, a ground fire. Whereas a ground fire, you can attack it using hand tools or ground personnel. With crown fires, you basically need to step back and strategically plan large fuel breaks and use indirect methods such as aircraft to put the fire out. I know we've looked at about 6 trees in here, and every single one of them is infected. And so this stand will substantially change. And one of the big changes that we're going to see is the loss of these oak trees will create growing space for other species of plants to come in. And what we see quite often in Marin County is the invasion of Scotch and French broom. These are two exotic plants that have been brought to Marin County and have escaped into the wildlands. So we have this new growing space that's made available. These species will move in and occupy this area and create a much greater fire danger than the oak trees that were here before them. One of the things that happens when trees become infested with this disease is they become progressively drier. It's one thing I didn't mention before, is that once the Phytophthora gets in and the beetles become active in the tree, the foliage progressively becomes drier and drier until it turns brown. Now, a green tree that's infected with this disease can have a foliage moisture of 20 to 40% lower than a healthy green tree, one that's not infected. So as you look across the landscape, even though the trees may be green, their fuel moisture is a lot lower and their potential to support a catastrophic fire is much greater.
The experts agree that there are several things that you, as a homeowner, can do to help fight the spread of sudden oak death. First, if you have oak trees on your property, focus on keeping the trees healthy. Avoid disturbing the root zone, protect them from frequent irrigation, and minimize injuries to branches. If you have to prune, try to limit it to dead, dying, and structurally unsound branches, and prune during the summer when Phytophthora is least active. Monitor your oaks for bleeding and oozing of reddish to brown material from patches on the trunk. This bleeding is the earliest detectable symptom of sudden oak death. The bleeding may be followed by an attack by 3 species of small beetles that produce piles of white or reddish-brown boring dust on the bark. Later, fruiting bodies of a fungus that attacks weakened trees may appear. On infected tan oaks, new growth and suckers also wilt suddenly, indicating a death sentence from sudden oak death. A new website has been set up for reporting suspected cases of sudden oak death.
The monitoring group here has developed a tool, the Oak Mapper website, which allows homeowners and others to report occurrences of what looks like sudden oak death in either their backyard or in wildland spaces where they're hiking or these sorts of things. So that's an effort to monitor what's going on in the urban setting.
Also, if you think you may have infected trees on your property, you can contact your County UC Cooperative Extension Office or County Agricultural Commissioner's Office for advice.
One of the things that I think is very important and we should consider is the long-term effects of this disease and our ability to stop it. Not aware of any forest pathogens that humans were able to stop. Okay, so we need to think in terms of managing the effects of this pathogen and the disease that it creates. And if that means going out into the landscape and cutting down trees to reduce the fuel load, putting in additional fuel breaks, we need to think in those terms.
Sudden oak death eventually causes a tree's foliage to turn brown, and it will usually kill the tree within 1 to 2 years. Try to avoid removing dead trees during the rainy season, from about mid-October through April. Leave any firewood and debris from trees on your property. It is believed that Phytophthora can be transported by infected firewood, soil, and by contaminated equipment. It may also move in surface and groundwater. Stacking your wood in a sunny location to dry out the wood may also help reduce the Phytophthora spread. To date, sudden oak death has been identified in 7 California counties: Napa, Sonoma, Marin, San Mateo, Santa Cruz, Santa Clara, and Monterey. But researchers are keeping a watchful eye to see if it spreads further.
The Oak Mortality Task Force was set up in the fall of 2000, so we're still in the first year of operation. The function of the Oak Mortality Task Force is to bring together the various agencies, the university, nonprofit groups, to evaluate all aspects of the oak mortality. The task force meets about every 3 to 4 months in general meetings where each of the various committees of the task force provide general presentations on what they've been doing to the general membership. and there's usually an educational event associated with that. In addition to this, there have been a wide variety of educational activities that cooperative extension offices have held. Probably in excess of 100 different programs have been presented to homeowner association, arborists, foresters, just a wide variety of people have received educational presentations on what we know about this disease. The task force does have representatives of the Department of Food and Agriculture, the Department of Forestry. The directors of the various departments are regularly notified about what's going on and work closely on what some of the funding needs are for state government as well as research and local government, so that this is all well coordinated. And so the task force has really done a good job of making sure that everybody's resource needs for addressing this issue are coordinated among the various groups. One of the reasons we're very concerned about this, not only does it affect people's trees in their front yard, which affects their property value, but oak woodlands are an important part of our California ecosystem. The coastal oak woodlands, where this is currently found, represents about 1 million acres up and down the coast. These are woodlands that have the susceptible species in it. One of the reasons these oak woodlands are so important is they provide critical wildlife habitat for over 300 species of wildlife, in addition to perhaps 6,000 insect species and a variety of other different kinds of plant species. So when we take a whole part of that ecosystem out, when the live oaks or the tan oak or the black oak are removed wholesale from the stands, it makes has a big impact on wildlife, as well as aesthetics, nutrient cycling, water quality. So one of the reasons we're so concerned about this is because of its effect on ecosystem variables.
Experts say such a massive dieback of tan oaks and other oaks has never before been reported in California, and it is expected to become more widespread, potentially attacking more oak species and threatening oak woodlands throughout the coastal regions of California and Oregon. Researchers are racing time to understand and control the disease before these highly valued trees are lost forever from gardens and forests, before an altered forest ecology causes possible dramatic implications for wildlife habitat, and before the buildup of fuel from dead trees turns the entire landscape to ashes. Let's hope they find the answers soon. For more information and to keep up to date on the latest developments, visit the Sudden Oak Death website at www.suddenoakdeath.org.